In early 2024, an elderly man in northern England was admitted to the hospital with a bizarre and life-threatening condition. He was suffering from a flesh-eating disease. The cause was unknown, but one thing was certain. His illness was no accident. Over the following months, investigators would unravel what has been called the most elaborate murder scheme in English history. Hi there, I'm Kevin and welcome to Just Thought Lounge. Today's case is extremely strange. It is very recent and the details have only just been reported. This is a case that Crown prosecutors called stranger than fiction. Let's take a look. On January 22, 2024, 71-year-old Patrick OHara entered the Accident and Emergency Unit at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in his hometown of Newcastle upon Tyne. He had been experiencing what he described as severe pain in his upper arm. It centered around the injection site where he had received his COVID booster vaccination hours earlier. At first, staff believed that his injuries were the result of what they described as a clumsy vaccine jab. Patrick was sent home with antibiotics and painkillers and told to monitor the area should it get any worse. It did get worse. Over the following hours, his arm began to blister and grew seriously discolored. He returned to the emergency unit the next day. At the hospital, doctors were baffled as to what was causing the deterioration. Blood tests were taken, an analysis was carried out, but no meaningful results were obtained. It eventually became apparent that Patrick was suffering from necrotizing fasciitis. That is, Patrick had been infected with a rare, life-threatening, flesh-eating disease. The infection centered around the injection site of his supposed vaccine. Presumably, it was no booster shot, but rather a toxin that had been injected into his arm, causing the condition. Surgery was deemed necessary. Over the following days, Patrick underwent treatment to remove the diseased flesh from his arm, to slow the spread of the disease, and to try to save his life. Meanwhile, specialists were called in to try to identify the poison. If doctors knew what they were dealing with, there was a much greater chance of saving him. Eventually, Dr. Emmett, an expert in the field, formed the view that the poison was most likely iodomethane. It was highly poisonous and would react with external contact to the skin with the kind of burns and blisters that Patrick was experiencing. There were no known cases of it being injected into a human. This made the substance a particularly dangerous one, because it was nearly impossible to isolate and detect from a sample taken from any victim. Around 10 a.m. on January 22nd, the day that Patrick fell ill, he had scheduled a home visit with a community nurse through the NHS, the National Health Service. He had been in contact with nurse Raj Patel, who visited the home that Patrick shared with his partner of 20 years, Jenny Leung, that morning. The nurse, who spoke in broken English with an Asian accent, was a bit clumsy. He came across as competent, if a bit awkward. The appointment lasted roughly 40 minutes, during which time Nurse Patel also took blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, who had been in the upstairs of the house, came down partway through the appointment and inquired about her own health concerns. She requested to have her blood pressure taken, and Nurse Patel obliged. Completing this, the nurse then prepared to administer the COVID booster vaccine. Patrick informed him that he had received a booster less than 3 months prior, but the nurse insisted that it was nonetheless necessary that he have another. Upon injecting the fluid, Patrick reported feeling an immediate and intense pain. He jumped back and shouted, "Bloody hell." The nurse reassured him that his discomfort was not an uncommon reaction. It was nothing to be concerned about, telling him that the stinging in his arm was temporary and the pain would pass in time. After this point, Nurse Patel appeared to speed up his departure, rapidly packing up his equipment. He left in what Patrick perceived to be a bit of a rush. In the hospital where Patrick was admitted to the intensive care unit, staff examined one of several letters that had been sent to Patrick and Jenny's house on St. Thomas Street, addressed from Raj Patel from the community-associated nursing team. With the letter in hand, they informed the couple that there was no such thing as the community nursing team. Nor does the NHS employ a community nurse named Raj Patel. The letter was a forgery, and the nurse, a fraud. The forgery was sophisticated. It had the NHS logo pasted on the top corner. There were hyperlinks. It was written using medical language. The letter even included various data privacy notes that often appear on official communications. A second follow-up letter sent earlier that month was similarly structured. This letter contained a QR code, which linked to a short health questionnaire. It also proposed the appointment date and time for the home visit, between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on January 22nd. The day previous, Patrick had received a text message from an unknown number. It was a reminder notice for his appointment, ostensibly from Nurse Patel. It was not until the nurse showed indications of anxiety following the injection that Patrick grew suspicious. One statement in particular set off alarm bells. It was a statement made by his partner, Jenny. As the nurse exited the house, Jenny came down the stairs once again. In passing, she commented to Mr. Patel, "You are the exact same height as my son." Hearing this, with the pain searing in his arm, Patrick jumped up and ran after the nurse, but it was too late. To identify the fake nurse, Northumbria police began by tracing his steps back from the house in central Newcastle. They found that the man had traveled that morning from the Premier Inn in the city centre. CCTV footage showed the man arriving at the Premier Inn and checking into a room. The vehicle he drove had false plates. The man checked into the hotel under a false name. 2 hours after arriving, he left the hotel room again, this time wearing a long coat and a flat cap. He had blue surgical gloves on his hands and a clinical mask covering his face, even as he left his room, traversed the hotel lobby, and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's home on St. Thomas Street. License plates in the UK correspond to both the make and model of the assigned vehicle. The nurse's plates were easily identified as fake. They matched the make of the car, but not the model. Regardless, investigators were able to trace the path of the vehicle to the hotel that morning and back to its starting point. It led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, to the south of Newcastle, in Stockton-on-Tees. The vehicle drove from the house of a Dr. Thomas Kwan, Jenny Leung's son. Jenny, in fact, had more than one son from her first marriage. But it was her eldest, 53-year-old Thomas Kwan, with whom she had noticed had shared features with the mystery nurse. Thomas was born in Hong Kong but had moved to Britain 39 years earlier at the age of 13 as a student. His parents had chosen to send him to an English boarding school. Thomas continued on to study medicine at the University of Newcastle. He became a general practitioner and a partner at the Happy House Surgery in Sunderland, a city roughly a half an hour's drive from where his mother lived with her long-term partner in Newcastle. Thomas was married and had one son. The family lived in the town of Ingleby Barwick, in a newer development of homes popular with other doctors and healthcare workers. Thomas's relationship with his mother was a strained one. It seemed to have its roots in his parents' divorce, which had been 27 years earlier. Many of Thomas's concerns with his mother appeared to be financial in nature. He believed that prior to their split, Jenny had withdrawn £1 million from his parents' joint account and then forced his father into the divorce. Years later, when his father passed away, Thomas found further grievance when his will left a greater proportion of the inheritance to his younger brother than himself. Thomas later wrote to his mother regarding the perceived injustice. He accused her of stealing from his father and asked her to consider making it right. "You say that I am selfish or greedy, but I would like you to make me the sole executor of your will, as well as giving me the most and largest proportion of the properties and inheritance, as you have told me many times that I am the one you love the most out of all children." It seems that Jenny did not agree with her son's proposal. Instead, she amended her will to give her long-term partner, Patrick OHara, a life interest in the house. Should she pass before him, Patrick was entitled to live in the home until he too passed on. Thomas learned of these changes, and in November 2022, he went to the house on St. Thomas Street unannounced and forced his way in. The family doctor pushed past Patrick to get to his mother and confront her about the decision. The police were called. To these officers, the doctor explained his expectation that he would receive a greater share of his mother's finances. He was entitled as the eldest son, he told them. Jenny refused to bring criminal charges because of the effect that it may have had on her son's career. But the relationship was irreparably broken from that point onwards. Over the following 2 years, she and Thomas grew estranged. Around 15 officers and 2 vans from Northumbria Police's specialist search team descended upon the doctor's family home at Brading Court in Ingleby, Barwick. Officers donned gloves, masks, and even hazmat suits as they searched through the house and the adjoining garage. Neighbors in the quiet subdivision watched on in shock as the street was overtaken by firefighters and law enforcement. They were told to stay indoors for their own safety. It was unclear what substances would be uncovered in the search.
Swamped with just emergency services, and the worst part is you know there's something happening, something big, something different, something scary. It's not one of those routine things that you kind of hear. You read news and in other places and you say, oh my God. And to have this oh my God moment in your neighborhood with your neighbor, you just feel a little uncomfortable.
There were tents everywhere and people kind of going into the house. The scale was pretty large, and we were kind of anticipating something big was happening here. But just to be living in that fear, not knowing what it is and how safe we were feeling at that time, it was a little uncomfortable.
Liquid thallium, sulfuric acid, and arsenic were all found inside. The garage contained the ingredients and materials needed to produce ricin, a highly toxic poison and chemical weapon. An examination of the doctor's phone revealed a number of internet searches related to ricin and its use. These searches were undertaken between the 6th and 24th of January, beginning weeks before he administered the fake COVID booster shot, but also continuing in the days following. It seems that Dr. Kwan had been accumulating and studying various poisons for months, perhaps years. He had registered a company that claimed to undertake scientific research to his business address at the Happy House Surgery. Through this company, he ordered a growing collection of poisons, telling his practice manager at the surgery that the company was for other purposes, for investment properties, he said. The doctor's collection of poisons were found alongside a library of material offering instructions on how each could be used to harm a victim, as well as the clinical effects and the time taken for the chemical to take effect. Police found a book which detailed the amount of each poison required to kill a person. There was a list of chemicals and naturally occurring poisons and their characteristics, a recipe for the production of sodium cyanide, and a number of books on toxicology. On the hard drive of the doctor's computer, the police also recovered a copy of the National Center for Policing Excellence's Guidance on Murder Investigations. Through his medical knowledge and research, Dr. Kwan had planned to execute the perfect murder, and one that would maximize the suffering of his victim. His plan was brazen. It meant administering the poison in the full view of his own mother.
also think some have, when I've been covering this case, people have said, how did his mum and partner not know that it was him dressed as the nurse? But I think the fact that the letters had been sent, there was the text message, he manipulated his way into their home. And that's what criminal investigator Jen Jarvie told me too.
We know how much we trust a uniform, and unfortunately, there are some bad apples there. He used his profession to be able to have the knowledge to do it and to have that trust, that automatic trust of, you're coming into my home, you're giving me a COVID booster, you're trying to help me. So I'm more than willing to let you do that. And obviously the consequences of that for, his victim were horrendous.
Police also found evidence that Thomas had been spying on his mother and Patrick for quite some time. He had been primarily monitoring their finances. In December 2020, roughly 2 years before their falling out, Thomas gave his mother a laptop. She reportedly believed that this was an exceptionally generous gift. She did not suspect anything. But when police searched the Kwan home, they found images captured from the built-in camera of this laptop, pointing into the house on St. Thomas Street. Thomas had watched as they went about their lives and made transactions on the gifted computer. The laptop, loaded with spyware, allowed Thomas to monitor their communication in real time. He took screenshots of emails sent and received from the device to document their transactions. Even during their estrangement, he wrote to his wife that his mother and her partner, Patrick, were unfairly taking their hard-earned money and home. Police also found evidence of alternative schemes that the doctor appears to have contemplated executing to kill Patrick OHara before landing on the community nursing charade. The police found a document Thomas created claiming to be from an organization called the Northern England Men's Sporting Association and addressed to Patrick. It offered him free drinks and pre-made meals delivered straight to his door. There was a further document purportedly from an organization called Northern Wine and Drinks Tasting Gentlemen's Club. Investigators deduced that Thomas was considering whether delivering the poison through either a food or drink service would be the most effective way to kill him. Ultimately, Thomas Kwan created Raj Patel. In the garage, a fake ID card with a photo of Thomas in his wig and fake beard was left amongst the poisons. He had carried this with him to the house that day to cover himself should his mother or her partner request to see identification. His plan had been thorough and elaborate. Indeed, he had managed to fool his own mother while inside the house for over 40 minutes.
It come up on the news on Facebook when I was like, oh my God, that's my doctor. And I literally only saw him on the Thursday, and then that all come out on the Monday, and I just couldn't believe that he would actually do that to a family member. I just think he's broke every code there is, hasn't he? Like, he's just broke every law that there is for doctors. Like, you shouldn't do that no matter who it is.
Wow, that video doesn't look at him at all.
So
only by the eyes is only how I can recognise him. The rest of him doesn't look at him at all.
And how does it feel to know that that's your doctor?
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. Do watch a lot of crime documentaries and stuff, like usually in America and things, but when it happens that close to home, it's even that bit more terrifying.
Patrick OHara spent several weeks at the Royal Victoria Hospital's intensive care unit. Meanwhile, Dr. Thomas Kwan was arrested for the attempted murder.
Welcome to the police. Do you mind if you come in for a second, please? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, are you happy to talk in here? Yeah. Start climbing. You might as well just stay standing for us if you don't mind, please. My name is. The time is now 06:30 hours, okay? I'm arresting you for the offence of the suspicion of the attempted murder.
The doctor refused to assist Patrick's medical team by identifying the substance that he had injected into the older man's arm. This information could have assisted treatment and aided his recovery. Instead, Thomas stayed quiet while Patrick's health deteriorated further. Nonetheless, investigators and medical experts were able to use their best guess as to what they were dealing with. Thomas Kwan's phone showed that he had performed internet searches for iodomethane on 97 occasions in a 2-week period leading up to the poisoning. He had also searched and viewed a video showing how to produce iodomethane on his home computer. A glass tube containing the poison was found in his home, along with a hypodermic syringe and needle. From this evidence and the assessment of Patrick's symptoms, it was assumed that this was likely the substance he had chosen to use. Only Thomas Kwan could know for certain. Patrick underwent multiple surgeries to remove dead flesh, as well as plastic surgery to reconstruct parts of his arm. Patrick survived. Thomas admitted to administering a noxious substance of some kind into Patrick's arm, but claimed that his intention was not to commit murder. Instead, he wished only to cause what he described as mild pain or discomfort. In October, Thomas Kwan's case went to trial at Newcastle Crown Court. Patrick OHara was in attendance on day 1. Peter Makepeace, KC, began the Crown's opening statements by telling jurors that sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. He reasoned that the incredibly detailed planning carried out by Mr. Kwan is only explicable if the intention was murder, rather than to cause mild pain. His knowledge of poisons, his extensive research, and acquired expertise means he cannot have been ignorant of the life-threatening nature of the assault he was perpetrating. More than this, there was evidence to suggest that his motive was not purely financial. Indeed, the amount that the doctor stood to inherit after his mother's home and wealth was divided amongst Thomas and his siblings was not at all significant. An exact amount was not reported, though Justice Lambert referred to the sum as not so great. Killing Patrick would remove one hurdle to quickly receiving this sum, but would not increase it. Thomas's grievance seemed to stem from a perceived lack of affection from his mother in his childhood. According to statements he made to police, he was exacting a kind of revenge. In this way, the attack on Patrick was a means to inflict pain on his mother. On October 7, 2024, on just the second day of trial, Dr. Thomas Kwan pleaded guilty and saved the court what was expected to be weeks of further testimony. Patrick OHara told Justice Lambert that he had been forever changed by the horrific experience.
I suffer from extreme fatigue. Every time I get changed, I'm aware of the disfigurement to my arm, which is an everlasting memory of the attack on me. I'm now wary of health visitors and letters addressed from the NHS. I find it extremely hard to come back from a relaxed mindset that I once loved and cherished, and this has left me constantly on edge with a poor quality of life.
Cameras were allowed into the courtroom to hear the justice's reading of the sentence.
But your planning was extensive, detailed, it was calculated. The planning may have been in some respects unsophisticated. Mr. Greene points out that the false car plates didn't match the model of your car. Your planning didn't take into account the CCTV coverage of the area around St. Thomas Street. But you found the means of obtaining false plates, which cannot have been straightforward, and those plates matched the make of the car, if not the model. Your plan was always going to involve risks, and if there were areas where the plan was wanting, this was not due to any absence of effort by you. In my judgment, the extent of your planning and premeditation justifies a very substantial increase from the starting point in the guidelines.
Dr. Thomas Kwan was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months imprisonment, having been given consideration for eventually offering a guilty plea, as well as the fact that the 53-year-old had, to that point in his life, never been convicted of a crime. Patrick made a full recovery, physically at least. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress following his release from the hospital. The stress of the ordeal also led to the breakdown of his decades-long relationship with Jenny Leung. He was grateful for the excellent care he received from the real NHS professionals at the Royal Victoria, who saved his life.
First of all, I'd like to thank the judge for that sentencing, and I think justice has been done today. And firstly, I'd like to thank the police and the prosecuting department for the absolute magnificent job in bringing this man to justice. Secondly, I'd like to thank the NHS, especially the RVI Hospital, the consultants, the staff in Ward 47, and the outpatients in the plastics department. Without this, I don't think I would have survived.
That was the strange case of Thomas Kwan. Thank you once again for joining me, and a special thanks this week to Queen Kimberly for joining the Members Lounge. I'm Kevin, this is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.
When the scene plays, tell me who the scream saves. I can hear the cries repeat. Gotta take my time, cause these crimes get deep, but these stories can't hide. Let me find my seat. Kevin, go ahead and settle in. Gotta be selective, doing all the research, keeping it objective. Always been effective, can say he got